Thanks for being here, everybody. Finance and Personnel Committee meeting here of October. Our first order of business will be a roll call. Michael, please.
Alderman Bob Bauman.
Here.
Mr. Mark Flaherty. Mr. James Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Scott Mansky. Mr. Greg Marcus. Ms. Aichasawa. We have one.
Great. Thank you, Michael. First is any discussion and the approval of the meeting minutes from our last Finance and Personnel Committee. Any discussion? I would seek a motion for approval.
So move.
Do we have a second? Do we have a second for the approval of the meeting minutes? Great. All in favor of the approval of the meeting minutes, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. As is normal with our October meetings, committee meetings, and board meeting, we will probably be very financial heavy today with our budget discussions. But first, I'll turn it over to Steve for our financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Before we get into the budget presentation, a few quick updates on 22 financial activity. Number one, on September 29th, the district closed on the bond transaction that the board authorized management to pursue to address the expansion project budget gap. The transaction itself was generally uneventful, and the interest and yield rates came in approximately where we expected them to when we received board approval in August. Considering the recent volatility of the markets, we feel fortunate to have gotten this transaction completed when we did. Number two, some good news regarding the district's debt rating. 2 weeks ago, the S&P rating agency raised its long-term rating on the district's senior debt from BBB to BBB plus, and revised its outlook from negative to positive. This is quite a commentary on how the credit markets view the financial health of the organization and its long-term financial prospects. Management and the board should be proud of the collective work that's been put in over the last 2.5 years that pulled this organization really out of a COVID free fall and positioned it to not just recover, but also to grow into a much more financially healthier version of itself. This news is certainly worth noting today. And lastly, number three, regarding the 22 numbers, I'll keep it brief today. You'll notice the regular financial exhibits are included in your financial packet on pages 5 through 12. Our projected year-end forecast for 22 has improved by about 1.3 million since the August board meeting, in large part due to an increase in tax revenues. These numbers are incorporated into the budget exhibits that we'll be reviewing here in just a moment. Certainly, if there are any questions regarding the 22 forecast, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Marty, or feel free to jump in as we walk through the budget here today. And that, Mr. Chairman, I think is a good segue into the budget discussion.
Great. Any questions? Just pause for Steve on our current financial reporting. All right. Nope.
So consistent with past practice, Marty and I have had an opportunity to meet with each of you prior to this meeting to review with you the process and assumptions we use to develop the budget and to solicit your feedback and input. First, let me say thank you for your time, feedback, and support. We get an immense amount of value out of these discussions, and we hope you have a deeper understanding of the district's business operations and strategy as a result. Today, I'll attempt to keep my comments at a higher level, as most of this information has already been presented to you. Following my comments, and after answering any additional questions committee members may have, we'll ask the committee for a motion to recommend that the full board adopt this budget at next week's board meeting. So what is the story of the 23 budget? It's really about planning and preparing for the future of the district, specifically in terms of how we operate day in and day out, and how we represent ourselves to the community, to our clients, and to our internal stakeholders. The district will be incurring some startup costs in 23 associated with the opening of the North Building in 24. We'll be making investments in new personnel required to support the operations of the North. We'll be looking to upgrade critical IT infrastructure so that both the North and the South will have similar capabilities and functionality. And we'll be working to rebrand ourselves as we look to begin the next chapter of what we do as an organization and the impact we can and will have on the community in our immediate neighborhood and throughout southeastern Wisconsin. This budget also shows growth in operating income driven by new revenue streams, particularly in the sponsorship and advertising categories that we expect to become a bigger part of our income statement in future years. And it shows year-over-year growth in event activity that we expect will be even greater in 2024. We're also projecting continued growth in tax revenues. Revenue in this category has come a long way in terms of recovering since the depths of the pandemic, but believe there's more outsized growth to come. And we expect our restricted reserve balance to continue to grow. If you recall, this fund was critical to addressing the project budget gap and also serves as the district's rainy day fund for debt service. This fund continues to be in a very healthy state. And lastly, while we expect the unrestricted cash balance to show a decrease by year end, we expect the investments we're making today in preparation for the business to come in 24 will position us to spit out positive cash flow by 25. This budget is not a layup. There is some stretch here, and it will require the best efforts of the district to achieve these goals, but it's also not unrealistic. And there are potential upside opportunities that we may realize along the way that could lead to net gains above and beyond what's budgeted. This organization is on the rise, Mr. Brooks, and I would encourage our board members to buckle up because the next 12 to 18 months will be an exciting ride. Anything to add before we get into budget exhibits?
Well, I'm gonna buckle my seatbelt, although I
Buckle in.
I do think I know where the ride is going. Just to underscore what Steve has said, we've really spent a lot of time vetting it with the department heads, making sure that not only can we operate the organization for 23 with business as it's booked, but that we're in a good position to embrace what's going to happen in 24. As we've spoken individually with you, subject to making those investments next year, we're going to make sure that we're on plan for both revenue and expense, so that those knobs we have to control to affect the actuals for 2023 come in at or better than what we're projecting them to be. So, without further ado, take us through.
Okay, let's get to the budget exhibits. We'll take a look at page 14 of the committee packet, which is the event mix summary. As you've heard me say in the past, the development of the district's operating budget really starts with establishing these numbers. You'll see the total event activity for the district campus in 23 is budgeted to be 300 events, as noted in column A, line 24. Of the 300 events, only 30% of the budgeted events are considered blue sky events, which are events that we expect to occur but have not yet been booked. Further, these blue sky events drive only 14% of the district's budgeted operating income. These blue sky assumptions represent a modest year-over-year increase from the 22 budget. However, based on calendar availability and the strength and continuity of our sales team, we view this budget event mix as low risk, and we expect to achieve these numbers in 23 just as we're on track to achieve and likely exceed our blue sky numbers in 22. Overall, we do believe this budget event mix is a good representation of what we can expect for the upcoming year. So with the event mix established, let's jump to the income statements, which is pages 15 and 16 of your packet. And starting with the bottom line first, you can see on line 66, we're projecting net income before depreciation and expansion debt to be just about $21.3 million, a slight increase over our 22 forecast number, as well as our 2019 actual number, which represents our last full year pre-COVID. And while it's good news to be trending above pre-COVID levels, with the expected year-over-year growth in event activity, as well as capitalizing on new revenue opportunities, I think it's fair to ask why we're not realizing more bottom line growth relative to 22 or even 19. There's a couple of things working here that are suppressing net income in 23. Number one, as we've already mentioned, we're making investments in both personnel and resources to prepare for the opening of the North Building. That incremental expense shows up in lines 15 and 16 related to operating wages, 41 and 44 related to salaries, and 47 are advertising and marketing budget. And number two, maintaining prior year profitability percentages has become increasingly difficult as the prices for goods, services, and labor is increasing faster than our set rates. This is evident particularly in line number 4, food and beverage revenue, which is our share of the Levy gross revenue, which is expected to decrease year over year. Both of these issues we do believe are temporary. We'll have a bit more investment for the North Building operations trending into early 24, and we would expect profitability to come back in line here soon. So we don't believe this is going to affect next year's budget. A couple other line items worth noting in 23 that could have an impact beyond the upcoming budget year. Line number 10, advertising revenue is up, driven by new initiatives we're pursuing that have the potential to be a bigger part of the district's operating budget in 24. and beyond for that matter, such as presenting sponsors for experiential events. By way of example, We Energies Foundation is a presenting sponsor for the Beyond Monet event, which kicks off next week, and we expect similar opportunities moving forward. Line 11, we're assuming we secure a convention center naming rights sponsor in 23, and we've budgeted a partial year of revenue here for that. I do expect to see growth in this category as we move into 24 and beyond. And line 12, parking revenue remains relatively modest, but want to note that in future years, this will be an important growth area for district revenue, as we would expect to exceed 2019 numbers by 2025 due to an increased number of spaces, higher rates, and more event activity. Overall, we're expecting to add $1 million to operating income, or a 7% year-over-year increase. As for operating expenses, you'll see on line 27, we're expecting about a 5% year-over-year increase. The three big drivers are line 15, wages, line 18, utilities, and line 25, repairs and maintenance. Wages are up because event activity is up, but also because of the full-time positions that we expect to hire in preparation for the opening of the North Building, and certainly no surprise with utilities due to rising energy costs. Overall, from an operating income perspective, the increase in revenues driven by event activity, along with a modest increase in operating expenses, we're showing on line 28 that we do expect net operating income to be up year over year by about 20%. On the non-operating revenues, we'll start with taxes first. Excuse me, lines 29 through 34. You'll see increases across all four revenue streams. These year-over-year increases are consistent with the HVS study that was published in 2020 and consistent with those projections developed by Baird as part of our newest bond deal, and also in line with forecasts by CBRE regarding the Milwaukee hotel market. We do expect future growth after 23 to decelerate a little bit as we reach full recovery in most industries impacting tax revenues. Line 37, the increase in Bucks rent is consistent with the contract. And line 38, Bucks district ticket surcharge revenue shows a slight decrease year over year. We're assuming only one Bucks playoff round, whereas we hosted two in 2022.
And that's for budget purposes. We expect them to win the NBA title. However, from a budgeting standpoint, we're being conservative and just projecting first round.
Good interjection. Exactly. Yeah.
That's
a lot of upside there.
It's all there's upside. A lot of upside in our budget.
Thank you. Moving on to non-operating expenses, we are up almost 9% year over year, which is line 65. Much of that is coming from salaries, lines 41 and 44, due to new position adds to support the expansion. And also the Visit Milwaukee fee, line 49, is increasing as a result of the increase in prior year tax revenues. As for other items, line 46, we are budgeting for a substantial increase in our pension payment to the city. Line 47, advertising expense is up as we expect to begin initiatives towards rebranding and rebuilding the district's website. And line 62, miscellaneous expenses up related to initiatives we're gearing towards our part-time workforce, which is partly a result of the employee engagement surveys that we've deployed over the last several years, and also expenses we believe are necessary to sustain the BPX culture that we've worked so hard to build here. In line 63, we're expecting to make a pilot payment to the city, consistent with the contract we executed in 2020, which calls for next year's payment to be $500,000. Lastly, line 67, bond interest for the expansion now includes the bond interest that we will incur as a result of the debt issue we closed on last week to fund the project budget gap. Overall, management is pleased with the position of this income statement for 2023. We're able to show some top-line revenue growth, as well as significant investment in expansion startup costs, while still growing year-over-year net income, albeit modestly. Are there any questions before we move on from the income statement? Okay, well, we'll take a look at the 23 capital budget, which are pages 17 and 18 of your packet. You can see this list is pretty substantial, as was the case last year. We segmented expenditures into three tiers, with tier A being the priority and focusing on projects that deal with life safety, building functionality, code compliance, and contractual obligations. Our spend in 23 is projected to be about $500K more than 2022, which is noted on line 94 of the exhibit, which is a 30% year-over-year increase. Just to quickly note, lines 50 through 54 do show the almost $600K in IT investment, which I mentioned before, to replace aging hardware and upgrade infrastructure in the south building to match the capabilities of the future north. There's lots of other various projects in this budget that require attention, but also no real surprises. We, of course, will monitor and address unexpected needs throughout the year and appropriately pivot when required. Marty, anything to add on the capital budget?
If you could just give a quick on the 250 for with the Admirals. I don't know if that's.
Yes, that's line 29. Part of our lease agreement with the Admirals requires the district to spend $250,000 in capital expenditure spending in the arena each year for seasons 6 through 10. We have been working cooperatively with the Admirals to identify those projects. We are well underway to complete that same number, if not a little bit more, for 22, and we'll begin planning discussions. I would say early next year with the Admirals to determine how we spend that money in 23.
Steve,
Yes, Mark.
how long is the Admiral's lease? When does it end?
We are in year
6
of a 10-year lease agreement with the Admirals, Mark.
Okay. Have they ever expressed what their plans are?
I had an informal meeting with Harris about 6 weeks ago, and he asked, he raised it in that meeting if we'd be interested in talking about that. The contract does address option years. I said to him, we're always open to talking. If you've got a proposal, would like to talk about it, send it to me. We'll start gauging. It's clearly something I would need to bring to the board. I would want to bring to the board for their input, but nothing official as of yet, Mark.
So the option at whose option? At the Admiral's option or yours?
It's addressed as a I don't know what to say this correctly. It's not an automatic 5-year extension. It provides for both parties to get together to talk about new terms and conditions. I view the way the contract is written is we have an obligation to sit with them, but it's if we chose to, with a clean sheet of paper and look to negotiate new terms if we chose to.
Yeah. Okay. I know that it's not a favorable contract for the district, right?
There are terms in the lease agreement that are more favorable to the team than other similar contracts I've been involved in throughout my career.
Okay. So you don't think talking about it now to maybe right the ship?
The interest for the Admirals is to have the agreement. I don't want to speak for Harris, but the two parties view the existing agreement differently as far as who it's favorable for. So I think that.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Hey, Scott.
Morning, Scott.
Morning, Scott.
Good morning.
Steve, could you give Scott a reset with just where we are?
Yes, Scott, we're about to dive into the cash flow projection exhibits on pages 19 and 20 of the committee packet here.
All right. Thank you.
Before we do, Scott, we've gone through the budget. Any questions that you have you'd like to share before we move on?
No, I think the information that was provided to me is very helpful, and I'm good with where the budget's at.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, well, let's take a look at page 19, which is our restricted cash flow. As I mentioned at the opening of the presentation here, the news is positive. We continue to show growth in that fund balance and expect to end the year at just about $23 million, which is a $2.3 million year-over-year increase. As this fund grows, we'll be considering options of how best to use this reserve, including paying down existing debt or applying funds towards future capital projects. Certainly more discussion to come on that with this committee and the larger board in the coming years as we approach call dates on some of our existing debt. For now, it remains the district's rainy day fund, and we're very comfortable with where the balance is today. As for unrestricted revenues, which is page 20, line number 1 is where we expect the cash balance to be as of January 1st, 2023. Line 25, all the way over under the December column, is where we expect the cash balance to be as of December 31st. And line 24 is the net change for the year, a decrease in cash of just over $2 million. Again, this isn't unexpected due to the ramp up of costs associated with the opening of the north building. I would expect us to lose less in 24 and look to, at a minimum, break even in 25, if not spit off some positive cash flow. Management is not concerned about our cash balance nor our ability to continue as a going concern and continue to fund the operations of the district and meet our current obligations for the foreseeable future. Just one final note regarding the budget, and that pertains to risk. During the budget development process, we identified three primary risks that could get in the way of achieving our goals. Number one is surrounding our most important resource, our personnel. Employee attraction and retention continues to be a challenge, not just for the district, but really anybody operating in our industry. Certainly number two, rising inventory costs due to inflation and supply chain issues for both the food and beverage business as well as district budget items such as cleaning consumables remain a challenge. And number three is a recession, if we have one, if we're currently in one or not, and what impact that might have on the district, if at all. All three of these risks do create potential to eat into the profitability of the district. We believe we've baked into budget some of this risk, which is one of the several reasons why we're showing negative cash flow in 23. These are challenges that are really driven by macroeconomic forces that almost every business must address in some way and aren't unique to the district. It's certainly something we'll keep an eye on as we move forward into 23 and take the necessary mitigation strategies should these pop up along the way. So, Mr. Chairman, that was a quick run through the budget. We tried to keep this at a higher level today. I understand that many of you have already seen the detail around much of this last week. This is a budget we're proud of that will be challenging to meet and beat, but does not introduce, in our opinion, material risk to the district's financial position. Happy to entertain any additional questions that the committee members may have.
Are there any questions from anybody on the committee?
I guess one of the questions that I raised during a separate discussion, and just if you can just talk about it here, is your ability to be able to adjust, because of the items that you brought up of, recession, rising inventory costs, talent retention, just your ability to address those items and how you can address those items.
Sure, Scott. I mean, coming out of COVID, fortunately or unfortunately, we do have a playbook from which to draw mitigation strategies from to stem some of those cash outflows, payment deferrals to vendors, including Visit Milwaukee. We don't like, balancing our budget on the backs of Visit Milwaukee, but that's something that in the past has worked to the benefit of both organizations. Deferral of repair and maintenance and capital spending is certainly another lever we can pull. We also have this $2.5 million operating reserve that is held by the trustee that we've not drawn on, I think, ever throughout the organization's life, going back 25, 30 years. But it's there for those sort of times in which we might need it. In terms of talent retention and attraction, our new vice president of HR, Nyla Tuxson, and her team, I think, have done a pretty good job of refocusing how we recruit. Levy Restaurants is, taking best practices learned from their corporate offices and deploying them in our sites and around the Midwest. So I feel like we're in a good position, Scott, going into 23. But if those challenges prove to be too great, we have these mitigation strategies to draw from.
Scott, in addition to that, we have presented this budget to the senior leadership earlier this week and advised everyone that an endorsement from this committee and then an approval by the full board next Friday does not authorize any expenditures. It authorizes the roadmap that we've put together and how we're going to run the business, but that any expenditures and any hires need to be run by both me and Steve prior to anything getting done. So as we really cut back dramatically on costs during COVID and unfortunately had to go through layoffs, furloughs, and pay reductions, that's in reference to or in support of Steve's comment about having a playbook. There are dials that discretionary spending could come to a halt. And as Steve indicated, we have $1.5 million in new hires, most of which don't start until July anyway. So at that point that we start spending that money, we would need to be on track to achieve or surpass this budget to begin with before we start spending any of those funds.
Just a note on talent retention in our businesses. We found that we had to pay a lot more money to people in reopening. And as we're going through our budget process right now, the tables have turned. I mean, I think businesses were taken advantage of by employees to a certain extent. And I just hope, and I don't think I understand the people you hire there are different from the people we hire in the hotels and other businesses, but I do believe that the tables should turn and have turned on that, where you're not being held captive by, well, I'm not going to come to work unless you pay me this. So anyway.
Mark, appreciate that. We've been very fortunate that up to this point, even through the recovery period of COVID, we have not, I've not felt that we've been held hostage by anyone. We've had very little insignificant turnover of full-time staff and have a modest increase budgeted for 2023, well within the national average and not too aggressive, but enough to keep us competitive.
Great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments?
I think 2023 is also a year too that you have to balance against the fact that you're going to be opening up, you know, the expansion.
Mhm.
So you kind of gotta look what's happening in your marketplace, but you also have to balance against the fact that you got to get ready for the opening.
Mhm.
So thank you for addressing my question about, you know, being able to manage. And you're right, you've been through the COVID issue and that, and your ability to do that. Thank you.
All right, if there aren't any other questions at this point, I just would entertain a motion by the committee to endorse the proposed budget. And
I'll make a motion to endorse the budget or approve the budget.
well, it's an endorsement and a recommendation for approval by the board
Okay,
next week.
I'll make a motion to endorse and a recommendation for approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye. Oh, here it is.
Turkish embassy.
I know, I just arrived.
No,
yes.
all good. All right, I think, are there any opposed? I just want to make sure we're there. Great, the motion for endorsement and recommendation for approval passes. Next order of business, Marty?
Yeah.
CEO report.
Just to give an overview, I'm not going to get into the CEO report, but we'll talk a little bit about updates for event activity for the theater, arena, and the convention center. Talk about how we're progressing with meetings and conventions for the balance of 22 and into 23. Give an update on the most recent shows that we've had. Give the board an update on the town hall meeting that we had a week ago with 100 members of our full and part-time staff that went really well. And Mike Abrams will give an update on where we are with the expansion, but that's the overview for the CEO report.
Is there anything anyone else would like to see added as part of that? Okay, go ahead.
Wait, are we going to get a presentation from Visit Milwaukee?
Yes, that's for next week. It's a joint presentation.
Mark, that's scheduled to occur at the top of the meeting. So the way that the meeting is formatted for next week is roll call, meeting minute approval, and then Leslie Johnson and Megan Setman from our group will give a state of meetings and convention business looking short and long term. After that's completed, obviously, question and answer opportunity, and then we'll get into the financial piece where Steve will present the budget to the full board and continue with.
You know, Marty, I know you and Peggy talk on Fridays. I'm going to be out of town. Could you ask that they focus not on the RNC, but what is going on now and in 23?
I will make that point. I'm sure that's the intent, but I will restate that. Thank you for that, Mark.
I have RNC fatigue right now because everyone is jumping around how great this is. And these hotels and restaurants have not recovered and they need a push. Anyway, that's my comment.
Well, and part of, I think what I'm hopeful that you'll hear next week is that the outlook for 23 is far more encouraging today than it was a year ago at this time. We were very concerned that we were not going to be as far along in COVID recovery as we are. And there have been a lot of short-term meetings booked in 23 that we did not foresee. So
Great.
Okay, but I'll make sure I pass that along to Peggy.
Thank you.
Anything else? We want to make sure we address all those things in the report, and I do. So again, Mark, I didn't know if your question was specific to visit. I do know that there are things as they go into their budget process that Marty and Peggy will be sitting down and going through and make sure that everything's being checked off as the new budget we put together had different benchmarks that they needed to hit as well in order for payment. So it was a different structure than they have in the past, and this will be the first time going through that process, I believe, which I think will add to the clarity of some of the things and some of the questions that people have around visit. But I think it's a very good and fair point. I, like you, have the similar fatigue going on, and I think we want to know.
I mean, I think we should put a ban on congratulating everyone. I think we were lucky enough or unlucky enough to live in a state that the reason this came here was because of the state of politics right now.
Or nobody else wanted it.
And nobody else wanted it, right? So.
Right, and I think now we got to start moving everything forward, and how do we use that as a way to move everything forward, not just that thing, right? It's a bigger process. So
right.
Point heard, and I think we all have similar comments around that, so we'll make sure that your commentary is voiced as well.
Okay.
Friday. With that, we have the agenda, pretty much the similar agenda to what we just went through, with the exception of that additional meeting convention industry update from both Megan and Leslie from Visit and the Center District. If there's anything else you'd like to see added, please let us know. Mike will also give us a update from CAI Con about where we are with the expansion. Future meeting dates, provided everything goes smoothly, we may alter the November one. I'm assuming things will go fine at our meeting next week, and if that is the case, we would probably not have the November meeting, but that's something that we'll discuss with Marty and the rest of the board just to make sure we're all moving things forward. With that said, unless there's any other questions or comments, I will seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
Scott.
Mark. Thanks for jumping on.
Bye.
with roll call. Michael, please.
Mr. Grady Crosby,
Here.
Representative Keelan Haywood, Senator Latanya Johnson, Mr. James Cantor.
Here.
We do not have a quorum.
Okay, great. Because we do not have a quorum, I will move to the third agenda item, and once we do have a quorum, we will come back to the discussion and approval of the meeting minutes. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve Marsh for our financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Before we get into the budget presentation, a few quick updates on 22 financial activity. Number one, on September 29th, the district closed on the bond transaction that the board authorized management to pursue to address the expansion project budget gap. The transaction itself was generally uneventful, and the interest and yield rates came in approximately where we expected them to when the board gave us authorization in August. Considering the recent volatility in the markets, we feel very fortunate to have gotten this transaction completed when we did. Number two, some good news regarding the district's debt rating. 2 weeks ago, the S&P rating agency raised its long-term rating on the district's senior debt from BBB to BBB+, and revised its outlook from negative to positive. This is quite a commentary on how the credit markets view the financial health of the organization and its long-term financial prospects. Management and the board should be proud of the work collectively put in over the last 2.5 years that pulled this organization out of a really COVID free fall and positioned it to not just recover, but to also grow into a much more financially healthier version of itself. This news is certainly worth noting today. And lastly, number three, regarding the 22 numbers, I'll keep it brief today. You'll notice the regular financial exhibits are included in your packets on pages 6 through 13. Our projected year-end forecast for 22 has improved by about 1.3 million since our last board meeting in August, in large part due to an increase in tax revenues. These numbers are incorporated into the budget exhibits that we'll be reviewing here in just a moment. And certainly if there's any questions regarding the 22 forecast, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Marty, or feel free to jump in as we walk through the budget here in just a moment. Morning, Mr. Haywood.
Grady, just so you're aware, Representative Haywood just was able to join the meeting.
Hey. Morning, Representative Haywood.
Morning, good morning.
Representative, we're just about to review the proposed 23 budget. Before we get into the budget, just so this committee is aware, the Finance Committee just recommended in their meeting that just concluded to have the full board adopt this budget at next week's board meeting. In addition to today's discussion with them, Marty and I had met with them either individually or in small groups last week to really take a deep dive into these numbers for 23. So I think this committee can take a bit of comfort in knowing that these numbers are well vetted. Today I'll attempt to keep my comments at a high level, as we'll be presenting much of this information again at next week's board meeting. And of course, if there's any questions that come up along the way or even after this meeting, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Marty. So the story of the 23 budget, what is it? It's really about planning and preparing for the future of the district, specifically in terms of how we operate day in and day out, and how we represent ourselves to the community, to our clients, and to our internal stakeholders. The district will be incurring some startup costs in 23 associated with the opening of the North Building in 24. We'll be making investments in new personnel required to support the operations of the North. We'll be looking to upgrade critical IT infrastructure so that both the North and the South will have similar capabilities and functionality. And we'll be working to rebrand ourselves as we look to begin the next chapter of what we do as an organization and the impact we can and will have on the community in our immediate neighborhood and throughout southeastern Wisconsin. This budget also shows growth in operating income driven by new revenue streams, particularly in the sponsorship and advertising categories that we expect to become a bigger part of our income statement in future years. And it also shows year-over-year growth in event activity that we expect will be even greater in 2024. We're also projecting continued growth in tax revenues. Revenue in this category has come a long way in terms of recovering since the depths of the pandemic, but believe there's more outsized growth to come. And we expect our restricted reserve balance to continue to grow. If you recall, this fund was critical to addressing the expansion project budget gap and also serves as the district's rainy day fund for debt service. This fund continues to be in a very healthy state. And lastly, while we expect the unrestricted cash balance to show a decrease by year end, we expect that the investments we're making today in preparation for the business to come in 24 will position us to spit out some positive cash flow by 25. This budget is not a layup. There is some stretch here, and it's going to require the best efforts of the district to achieve these goals, but it's also not unrealistic. And there are potential upside opportunities that we may realize along the way that could lead to net gains above and beyond what's budgeted. This organization is on the rise, and I would encourage our board members to buckle up, Mr. Brooks, because the next 12 to 18 months will be an exciting ride. Right?
We love challenges, and we are faced with another hard year ahead, but very confident that based upon the team we've assembled here and collaborative effort to visit Milwaukee, we are going to achieve, if not surpass the budget we'll be taking you through shortly.
So to the budget exhibits, let's take a look at page 15 of your packet. This is the event mix summary, and as you've heard me say in the past, the development of the district's operating budget really starts with establishing these numbers. You'll see the total event activity at the district campus in 23 is budgeted to be 300 events, as noted in column A, line 24. Of the 300 events, only 30% of the budgeted events are considered blue sky events, which are the events that we expect to occur but have not yet been booked. Further, these blue sky events drive only 14% of the district's budgeted operating income. While these blue sky assumptions represent a modest year-over-year increase from the 22 budget, based on calendar availability and the strength and continuity of our sales teams, we view this budget event mix as low risk and expect to achieve these numbers in 23, just as we're on track to achieve and likely exceed our blue sky numbers in 22. Overall, we believe this budget event mix is a good representation of what we can expect for the upcoming year. So with the mix established here, let's jump to the income statement, which is pages 16 and 17 of your packet. And starting with the bottom line first, you can see on line 66, we're projecting net income for depreciation and expansion debt to be just about 21.3 million, a slight increase over the 22 forecast number, as well as our 2019 actual number, which represents our last full year pre-COVID. And while it's good news to be trending above pre-COVID levels, with the expected year-over-year growth in event activity, as well as capitalizing on new revenue opportunities, it's fair to ask why we're not realizing more bottom line growth relative to 22 or even 19. And there's a couple of things that are working here to suppress net income in 23. As we've already mentioned, we're making investments in both personnel and resources to prepare for the opening of the North Building. And that incremental expense shows up in lines 15 and 16 related to district operating wages, and 41 and 44, which relate to salaries and benefits, and also 47, our advertising and marketing program. And number two, maintaining prior year profitability percentages has become increasingly difficult as the prices for goods, services, and labor is increasing faster than our set rates. This is evident particularly in line number 4, food and beverage revenue, in which our share of Levy gross revenue is expected to decrease year over year. Both of these factors we believe are temporary and unique to the 23 budget cycle, and we expect them not to factor in as much in the 24 budget. A couple other line items worth noting in 23 that could have an impact beyond the upcoming budget year. Line 10, advertising revenue, is up, driven by new initiatives we're pursuing that have the potential to be a bigger part of the district's operating budget in 24 and beyond, such as presenting sponsors for experiential events. By way of example, We Energy's Foundation is the presenting sponsor for Beyond Monet, which is kicking off next week, and we expect similar opportunities moving forward. Line 11, naming rights revenue. We are assuming we will secure a convention center naming rights partner in 23 and have budgeted a partial year of revenue. I would expect to see growth in this category as we move into 24 and beyond. And line 12, parking revenue remains relatively modest, but want to note that in future years, this will be an important growth area for district revenue. We would expect to exceed 2019 numbers by 2025 due to an increased number of spaces, higher rates, and more event activity. Overall, we are expecting to add $1 million to operating income year over year, or 7%. Looking at operating expenses, you'll see on line 27, we're expecting about a 5% year over year increase. The three big drivers are line 15, wages, 18, utilities, and line 25, repairs and maintenance. Wages are up because event activity is up, but also because of the full-time positions that we expect to hire in preparation for the opening of the North Building. and no surprise with utilities due to rising energy costs. Overall, from an operating income perspective, the increase in revenues driven by event activity, along with the modest increase in operating expenses, we're showing on line 28 that we expect net operating income to be up about 20% year over year. On the non-operating revenues, we'll start with taxes first. Lines 29 through 34, you'll see increases across all 4 revenue streams. These year-over-year increases are consistent with our HVS study that was published in 2020, consistent with those projections developed by Baird as part of our newest bond deal, and also in line with forecasts by CBRE regarding the Milwaukee hotel market. We do expect future growth to decelerate a little bit after 23, but would expect to see robust growth in 23. Line 37, the increase in Bucks rent is consistent with the contract. On line 38, Bucks district ticket surcharge revenue shows a slight decrease year over year. We're assuming only 1 Bucks playoff round, whereas we had 2 in 2022.
And Grady, and Representative, that's not based on our support and expectation that the Bucks will not win a championship in 23. It's just being conservative. We're only budgeting for the first round, but expect all 4 rounds to be played by the Bucks, for the record.
Moving on to non-operating expenses, those are up about 9% year over year, and that's noted on line 65. Much of that is coming from salaries, lines 41 and 44, due to new position adds to support the expansion, and the Visit Milwaukee fee, line 49, is up as a result of the increase in prior year tax revenues. As for other items, line 46, we're budgeting for a substantial increase in our pension payment to the city. And line 47, advertising expenses up as we expect to begin initiatives towards rebranding and rebuilding the district's website. Line 62, miscellaneous expense. This is up related to initiatives we're gearing towards our part-time workforce, which is partly a result of the employee engagement survey, and also some necessary investments we would need to make to sustain our BPX culture. Morning, Senator.
Hi, how are you? Hi.
Morning.
How are you?
Senator, we're just
Sorry.
walking through the budget presentation right now. We've reviewed the budget event mix for 2023, which is a year-over-year increase from 22, and just concluding comments on the income statement right now on page 17 of your
Okay,
packet.
thank you.
Line 63, we're expecting to make a pilot payment to the city consistent with the contract we executed in 2020, which calls for this year's payment to be $500,000. And lastly, line 67, bond interest for the expansion now includes the projected bond interest expense that we will incur as a result of the debt issue we closed on last week to fund the project budget gap. Overall, management is pleased with the position of this income statement for 23. We're able to show top-line revenue growth as well as significant investment in expansion startup costs while still growing year-over-year net income, albeit modestly. Are there any questions on the income statement before we move on? Okay. We'll turn our attention to the capital budget next, which is pages 18 and 19 of your packet. You can see this list is pretty substantial. As was the case last year, we've segmented expenditures into 3 tiers, with tier A being the priority and focusing on projects that deal with life safety, building functionality, code compliance, and contractual obligations. Our spend in 2023 is projected to be about $500,000 more than 2022 at about $3.1 million, which is a 30% year-over-year increase. Just to quickly note, lines 50 through 54 show about $600K in IT investment that I mentioned before, and that's to replace aging hardware and upgrade infrastructure in the south building to match the capabilities of the future north. There's lots of other various projects in the budget that require attention, but also no real surprises either. We, of course, will monitor and address unexpected needs throughout the year should they come up and appropriately pivot when required. Any questions on the capital budget there? Pages 20 and 21 are the budgeted cash flow projections for the district's restricted and unrestricted revenues. We'll look at page 20 first. This is the restricted fund. The news is positive here. We continue to show growth in that fund balance and expect to end the year with a balance of about $23 million, which is a year-over-year positive change of just over 2.3 million. As we grow as an organization, hopefully as this balance grows, we'll be considering options of how best to use this reserve, including paying down existing debt or applying funds towards future capital projects while preserving an appropriate rainy day fund for debt service. Certainly more discussion to come on that with the board in the coming years as we near call dates on our existing debt. As for unrestricted revenues, page 20, line number 1 is where we expect the cash balance to be as of January 1st. Line 25 is where we expect the cash balance to be at the end of December 23. And line 24 is the net change for the year, decrease of just over $2 million. Again, this isn't unexpected due to the ramp up of costs associated with the opening of the North Building. As I mentioned before, I would expect us to lose less in 24 and look to, at a minimum, break even in 2025, if not spit out some positive cash flow along the way. Management is not concerned about our cash balance nor our ability to continue as a going concern and continue to fund the operations of the district and meet our current obligations for the foreseeable future. Just one final note regarding the budget here today, and that pertains to risks. During the budget development process, we identified 3 risks that could get in the way of achieving our goals. The first risk is surrounding our most important resource, and that is personnel. Can we continue to attract and retain the employees that fit into our BPX culture and drive the business forward? 2022 is certainly a challenge, not just for the district, but also for our key third-party service providers, including Movie Restaurants and CTI. The second risk is rising inventory costs for both the food and beverage business as well as district budget items such as cleaning consumables. And the third risk is recession, and the impact that might have, if any, on our district business. All 3 of these risks create the potential to eat into the profitability of the district. We believe we baked into our budget appropriately. Some of this risk, which is one of several reasons why we're showing negative cash flow in 23. These are challenges that are driven by macroeconomic forces that almost every business is going to have to address in some way in 23 and aren't unique to the district. But we do believe we have the appropriate mitigation strategies should these impact the district in a negative, meaningful way in 23. And there's similar strategies that we deployed during COVID in terms of payment deferrals to vendors, deferral of repair and maintenance and capital spending. We have a $2.5 million operating reserve that sits with our trustee at U.S. Bank that has not been drawn upon yet, or ever for that matter. So we have some tools in our toolbox. Things go sideways on us. We're not expecting that to happen, but we're prepared if it does. Anything to add to that, Marty?
Just as another way to say what Steve just wrapped up with is that Steve and I met with senior staff earlier in the week and shared with them today's agenda with both finance personnel and with this committee. And everyone is aware that at next week's board meeting, the full board will hopefully approve the budget that Steve has just taken you through. Approval of that budget doesn't mean the monies that are budgeted to spend in 23 are authorized to spend. It just means we have that roadmap to go by, and that any expenditures need to be approved by both the CFO and myself prior to incurring them. And that's really the best way we have to control how are we doing and being able to mitigate expenses by controlling approval and everything. So that Steve talked about $1.5 million between wages and benefits being in the plan next year for bringing on more full-time people, starting some as early as July. We'll have a good sense by end of June if we're on track to make our 23 budget, and we'll delay those hires if we need to, as one way to mitigate any shortfall in where we project full year in to be. So that, as well as holding off on capital projects if the money is not anticipated to be there. So we're pretty comfortable that we will make this budget, but to Steve's point, we do have a playbook that we wrote with COVID that we can draw upon should we be in a situation where we're having difficulty with either expenses or revenue as projected.
Are there any other questions for Steve or for Marty? From the personnel and finance side, we did vote to endorse the budget, just again to reiterate what Steve said earlier. So we will go to a full board approval on our board meeting. So if you have any questions now, if not.
Yeah, Jim, just a real quick question on Steve, on the restricted cash flow projections. Does that already, and maybe I'm just getting confused with regard to the last bond issuance that we approved. I thought some of our funding for that was coming from our restricted revenues, and I was wondering, does your spreadsheet on in the deck, I think this is page 20 of the deck, reflect that amount already out and paid to pay down that new bond issuance?
Yes, Marty, or sorry, Grady.
I'm Marty, that's great.
Grady, it does reflect that payment for that short-term bond. Page 12 shows the 22 restricted cash flow projection. We skipped over this exhibit, but this, you'll see on line 17 that 9.2 million outflow includes not just the regular 10% quarterly distribution that we're required to make towards existing debt service, but also includes that $7 million short-term bond that the board authorized in August and we closed on in September. So what you're seeing on page 20 is an accurate depiction of what we'd expect that balance to be at the end of 23 after paying down that debt.
Okay, because I knew it was around $9 or $10 million, so I was wondering if this was going to see another hit, which would really made that cushion even more thin. So good. The other thing, real quick, just wondering, you talked about risk, and I know this is a sort of a long-term, I don't know if you even classify it as risk when you talk about the events that we have scheduled for 23 and prospectively in the same kind of categories for 24. But, you know, the recent announcement with regard to the, you know, our competition in the entertainment or concert venue space, wondering if that was, you know, just kind of what the reaction is to that. The other thing, just generally with regard to that specifically, I don't know, I just found it odd that that we have a situation, and maybe it's not a situation, I don't know how to characterize it, but, you know, with regard to development in the Deer District, the development ends up being competition to the Center District, which, you know, owns the Deer District. So it's just an odd type of relationship where you own something and then allow those that are using it to create more competition for you in that particular space. And just wondering, are there any discussions with regard to how that should look going forward? Are we going to expect more competition coming out of that space? I don't know how to think about that right now. So just wondering what you guys are thinking.
Everybody's looking at you, Marty.
I'm looking at myself too. Grady, I appreciate you bringing up this topic. Certainly for 23, which we spent a lot of time focused on short term, we do not anticipate any impact in 23. The project has yet to be formally officially approved, nor have they broken ground. A lot of announcements about labor agreements, but there's still a ways to go before they even break ground. So for 23's budget, we really don't have any concerns. And while the event count doesn't really reflect it, we don't show in 23 a very significant increase in net event activity in Miller High Life Theater, and that's because what we're doing now with PTG is we're putting in the same number of events, but there's no risk to us. So the economics for the Miller High Life Theater are stronger in 23 than they had been, even though the event activity number of specific events didn't really change of note. As far as the second part of your discussion, we are certainly looking at long-term what the impact could be, and it's not so much from a competitive standpoint because the competition is good. It keeps everybody sharp. It makes you improve your service. It makes you be very aware of what you're charging the customer who uses your property. It's more about does that parcel and does the utilization of that parcel add anything to the marketplace? And that's really where we've struggled in trying to see the real positive to how that land would be used as two more concert venues. We have a very robust entertainment market currently. So where we take this, I think next couple of weeks, we still have some more fact finding to do ourselves, but we are very attuned to the project and those in favor and those against and the whys for each side. So more to come. I certainly will be coming to the board as appropriate to share future findings, but certainly be assured that long term, beyond 23, we are very aware of that and looking about how it could affect our business and what we would need to do to respond.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Any other questions? Steve?
What, certainly before next Friday's board meeting, if there are any questions about the budget, please don't hesitate to let me or Marty know. Be happy to answer those questions offline or even in the budget meeting. As mentioned before, the Finance Committee has voted to recommend that the full board adopt this next week. So I think we're in a pretty good position with where we expect 23 to go.
And to that point, prior to this morning's Finance Personnel Committee meeting, Steve and I, as we've done in prior years, met with the members of the committee separately, so we could have a more informal discussion and be assured that all of the committee members asked specific questions that challenged us in a good way, had us go back and look at the numbers to make sure that we were comfortable with them, and we did receive a fair amount of input and constructive comments in the preparation of the budget. So this was not a rubber stamp. This morning's meeting was far from a rubber stamp. It was collaboration. We feel very strongly of getting the Finance Committee involved in the development of the budget, not asking them to do the work for us, but just to ensure that we're going down the right path and that our assumptions are reasonable. I will say that Steve is very active in staying in touch with the CFO of Marcus Corporation. They have obviously a big stake in the hotel community. And we want to make sure that the assumptions we're making for hotel rates and taxes are consistent with what the biggest hotelier in the market is assuming. So we're very comfortable with the budget. We think it's going to take work. It's not a given, but we do think it's achievable.
Thank you guys for being very attentive and involved in making sure it's a collaborative effort, not just going through a process. So I think that's reflective of what we've seen in the work in both committee meetings today. With that, I will circle back to point 2 or agenda item number 2. I believe now that we have a quorum, Michael, do we need to confirm that we have a quorum?
I would do, Michael, I would do another
Roll.
roll call.
Mr. Grady Crosby,
Here.
Representative Cleveland Haywood,
Here.
Senator Tanya Johnson,
Here.
Mr. James Gander.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Agenda item 2, which we had skipped over for the financial reports, was discussion and approval of the meeting minutes from the last joint committee meeting, or the last committee meeting, which was in August. I would seek a motion for approval of the meeting minutes.
I'll make the motion.
Do we have a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Meeting minutes are approved. Back to agenda item number 5. Marty, update.
Thanks. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the CEO report, but just to give you a sense of the breadth of what I'll be covering. First off, as a reminder, in next week's full board meeting, at the top of the meeting will be a presentation from Leslie Johnson from Visit Milwaukee and Megan Setman, our VP of Sales at the district, giving the group a short and long-term view of the meetings and convention business. So hopefully it'll provide you with insight, supporting the budget assumptions we've made and make you feel encouraged that the hospitality, travel, and leisure businesses are on a good path to post-COVID. In fact, what we're seeing is, not to take any thunder from them, where a year ago expectation was by mid-24 we should be back to pre-COVID numbers. It's looking more like it'll be at some point mid-year next year. So it's very encouraging that recovery is coming along faster than initially anticipated. I'll go over the update of event activity in the theater, convention center, and UWM Panther Arena. We will have, hopefully you've all gotten invitations to attend the Beyond Monet function next Wednesday. We'd love to have you there and a guest. We have over 600 people already responded to attend, and it'd be a great event, debuting the new residency event in our exhibition level. Give you an update on where we are with meetings, conventions, and special events for 2023. Talk about past shows, an update on where we are with naming rights for the expansion, a recap of the town hall. We had our quarterly town hall meeting with 100 members of our full and part-time staff last week. That was, I think, very well received and continues to support the staff in their desire to know what's going on from the organization, from inside the organization, as opposed to hearing or reading about it outside of our place. Mike Abrams from ICON will give an update on where we are with the expansion. If you haven't had a chance and have a moment or two to connect, I encourage you to go to buildingmore.com and buildingmore.com. Check out our live webcam feed. It is mind-boggling to me how much work has been done already. And they're pouring the expo hall level floor. The garage has been completely poured, and it's going up like gangbusters. So that's the gist of what I'll be going into more detail next week about.
Great.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything else you'd like to see Marty update? Anyone else? Great. All right, thank you. The last two items are just board meeting agenda meeting review. We will have an action item, so please, important to be there for the approval of the budget for 2023. We also have the update, as Marty said, from Megan Setman and Leslie Johnson, jointly from WCD and Visit, on the meeting and event industry, and then from our perspective, and then also Mike will give an update from CAA ICON. Those are the only agenda items that would be different from the governance meeting from today.
So will there be a board officer?
And board officer election that is also going to be added.
Good catch there, Mr. Vice Chair-elect.
So if there's anybody that would like to be nominated, please let us know before next meeting.
What's the position, Mr. Chair?
It's for our officer positions, so chairman, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer.
And currently, Jim is chair, Grady is vice chair, Greg Marcus is treasurer, and Mark Flaherty is secretary.
Just you get to this. Michael, for some reason, the invite for the board meeting dropped off my calendar. I was just looking at my calendar. Could you just send me another invite? I would appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
So a few action items, so we'll make sure we are able to attend, or if not, please let us know and we will adjust accordingly. If everything goes well and everything gets approved, including the budget next, at the board meeting, we would probably take the November meetings off the calendar, seeing there is not a lot to update on at the end of the year. So, but if we need to, we would keep those on. We do not have one scheduled for December, so November would be the last one, and that's a TBD based on the outcome of the board meeting next week. If there's anything else anyone needs to discuss currently? If not, and you need something added or want discussion in the next board meeting, please let us know and we will add that. With that, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Governance Committee meeting of October 2022 is adjourned. Thank you.
Before